everyone, and thank you for being in here, resting your weary bodies so early in the morning, for me anyway. So, I'm Imogen Heap. Hello, thank you for being in here. This is actually a very nice room for me because the forest is inspired the name of this organisation that I set up 4 years ago called Mycelia, which is actually what sits beneath the forest floor under our feet, connects all the trees and the mushrooms together and shares data amongst the organisms by way of hyphae. And I thought that was a nice metaphor for what I feel we're missing, well, in general, perhaps in the semantic web that we haven't yet come to materialise. And in the music industry, that's something that we desperately need, this idea of linked data, open data, sharing systems to create a healthy music ecosystem. And blockchain technology changed my life overnight as I discovered what perhaps it could do for the music industry, and I put down my creative writing tools and my baby at the time, and I just went into a bit of research into blockchain and what it could do, and discovered things like smart contracts, and so that's kind of why I'm here today, is to discuss the projects around Mycelia and why, and hopefully maybe you'll find something you're interested in and maybe you want to get involved. Now, I haven't slept very much, so this is probably not going to be my best talk. I am very sorry about that. I have a strange thing in my throat, and as a singer that's quite distressing, so I've not had the best sleep for 4 or 5 days. Anyway, so normally I've done about 15 talks on this over the last 15 or 10 weeks or something around these subjects, but I wanted to do something different because I was here last year and spoke about Tiny Human, which was the first song in the world to use smart contracts, and then I kind of wrote this idea for a talk around kind of data and linked data and highlighted things that have been happening in my life, and then I was going to weave that into why the creative passport, which I'll explain later. So I almost got to the end of that talk, and then I was like, but that's not what I was meant to be talking about. So then at 3 in the morning, I started writing a different talk, which is around what I've actually been doing on the tour since actually Stockholm, which is where we began, and we went through to Barcelona, Hamburg, blah, blah, blah. So which talk would you like? Would you like the one about basically like a life journey, a bit, and how everything kind of integrated into one another and what led me here, and it also kind of talks about the stuff that we're developing and why? Or would you like to hear more from the same kind of stuff, but from the angle of the tour, into where we've been, what we've discovered along the way? So hands up, that's the first one, about the kind of the life journey thing with the songs and the people and the champions. Okay. Good. And then the other one is more about like what's been going on in the tour, like discoveries and linking to projects. Right. I don't know. What do you think? Which one's more? He didn't like either of them. He's just like, I'm leaving. That's fine. Okay. Well, I don't know. Which one do you think, Carlotta? You've kind of frantically put them together, both of them.
Let's do the tour one.
Okay. Let's do the tour one. Okay. We'll do the tour one. Okay, thank you. I think there was probably a couple extra for the tour. So here we go. This is the Mycelia logo. Ta-da. It's kind of like an augmented play button. The RGB there representing all of the data that you might want to know about a song. Because the reality in this crazy world is that we don't have a repertoire, complete, entire global repertoire database for songs. So if anyone wants to know anything about a song, they can't really find verified data. There's fragmented databases, there's like 240 different collection societies alone, each with their own different data sets, each incomplete, each costing money to the music maker to keep theirs going. Anyway, so it's an augmented play button. The idea is that one day you might be able to click on a song and discover everything that you could need to know about that song. If you wanted to license it, if you wanted to record it, if you wanted to cover it, if you wanted to have it playing at your funeral, whatever you wanted. So here we go. So I'm going to begin in Stockholm, because that's where we began, not far from here. And we're now nearly at the end of our European tour, and we're back in Sweden, so we must like it. So Stockholm. We did our first Hack Week because on this tour we're doing hack events. We've got an exhibition. We're performing with my Mimu gloves. We're doing live concerts. We are doing changemaker forums where we meet up with music makers and services to try to massage this technology, which is essentially an identity for music makers to help us be kind of visible in the world, and to help us lasso our also fragmented identity. I don't know if anyone else feels a bit kind of untethered, like you're all your own individual people. Here you are, nice to meet you all. But you don't have a digital, full, kind of complete oracle version of you online anywhere. And for me, as my creative self, it would be extremely useful for me to be able to have all of that data in one place that represents me as a creative person, not as just a composer with that company over there, or just a blogger with that company over there, or just a person who releases songs over there. I'm an entire being with many skill sets, as we all are, and I would like to own my own identity and link into everything out there. So there's a company there's a few different organisations that, as a result of blockchain technology, are starting to innovate to create us an open songs database, which we really, really need. And over the 4 years since I wrote a little piece in Forbes about why blockchain, lots and lots of services have been in touch with saying, this sounds amazing, how can we work together, we want to help you develop stuff. Lots of offers of help, loads of thousands of musicians saying, I want to be on mycelia. I'm like, mycelia isn't a thing, it's just an idea. I just wanted to share what I would like to see in the world. I didn't think I would end up actually trying to help create it. So the Open Repertoire database is what we're looking for, and Repertoire is a company. It's actually based in Stockholm. A man who used to work at Spotify has begun this, and the idea is that we start to create that comprehensive open data on songs. And how do we, as the individual musicians, author into such a database, a registry of works, because they may have solutions for the collection societies or the labels, the performer representative coming in as organisations, but we don't have an identity, kind of collective identity for musicians to be able to author into that space. So if we're going to help try to shift the music industry into the direction which actually makes sense for musicians, we need to be an active part of that future. So in Stockholm at this Hack Week, we did an experiment where I sung a song. I did an improvised evening on the piano in a reactor hall. Actually, it wasn't hide and seek. It was Half-Life, because that's the reactor hall. So it was a song called Half-Life, not hide and seek, and it was Half-Life. And I played the song, and I invited anyone in the audience to put a little bit of money. I think it was one Swedish krona into the song, and they would receive up to 50% royalties for the recording side of that song, which meant that, and then we've made a smart contract to be able to pay all of those. I think 78 people signed up for that out of the 100 people or so in the audience. So they will be able to see whenever I receive any money into my account relating to this particular song, they will receive a proportion of that. So what they will see is that it takes an extraordinarily long time for any kind of sync money to come in, or any radio play. Not that I actually expect to get any radio play on that particular song. But for the streaming, they'll see how tiny, tiny, tiny it is. Because essentially, 1,000 plays represents one download in the old world, and nobody listens to a song 1,000 times. So it's not unless you're completely crazy. So another thing we did, so that's kind of like the idea that anyone could invest in the song. Anyone could essentially be the record label. If we create transparency in the value chain, where you can see where a song and who's being paid, then anyone could invest in that. When I was young, I tried to get some money from a bank to say that I needed to record my new album, because I'd recorded this album, and I'd made no money because it was the labels that got all the money, and I didn't know where any money was coming from because there's no transparency. But then when I wanted to do my own record, I tried to convince a bank that they should lend me £100,000 and that I could make a new record. But they didn't lend me the money. They said, go and get a proper job. And then I passed by my flat, and realised that actually the flat which I bought 5 years ago had gone up like 100 grand in value. So I took out the money and I made my own record and I set up my own label. And ever since I've done that, gone independent, things started to make sense for me. So how can we help musicians get that first bit of money that they need to just alleviate that the workflow that they would have had to do with 2 or 3 jobs at a time, and just concentrate on honing in on their craft. So another thing that we did there was Gig Seeker. There's another example of one of the many services that have been in touch with us about how, as an individual music maker, you could author into a database of where people are playing in the world, because they can reach into things like Live Nation or big kind of promoters, but we don't have an independent way to do that. So we did a little hack and proved that we could do that. We actually met a Danish company, because we're actually over the road in Copenhagen at the moment, kind of just came over today to do this one. We met a company there called Lo-Fi, who we're doing a little acoustic show tomorrow night for music makers around this. And every single place we go around the world on this tour, we work with a local designer. So there's a designer called Stina Randstadt, who we met in Stockholm, and she designed my first dress for the show. Okay, so some insights there. Barcelona, that was the next place that we went to, and the first thing that happened was we kind of walking down the street, and this girl came up to me, and she was like, I could tell instantly, as soon as somebody recognises me, there's like, I know you recognise me, don't try to pretend. And she was like, I said, yes. She said, are you? I said, yes. And she said, oh my God, what are you doing here? And I said, oh, I'm on tour. And she was like, no way, you're on tour. How come I didn't know? And I said, well, because it's hard to let people know. It's hard to let people know through the noise what you're up to these days. It's hard to, when you have like 6 or 7 different social channels and none of them are connected, it's really hard. And sometimes you have to pay to reach the people that you didn't have to pay before. And it's quite hard. So, and on top of that, YouTube made a choice to go to subscriptions, which meant that my own YouTube channel has been down for 4 months. And because they have such a monopoly over the kind of the viewership of your vlogs and your videos, it makes it very hard to reach that audience in another way, because there's no kind of centralized way to reach out. And so as a result, some of the shows, maybe even Barcelona, wasn't so well attended, but that's because the fans on the street don't know you're there. So as it turned out, she was going to Milan, and she came to see us in Milan later. And so that was all right. I met a company there called Fuga when I did one of my talks. I was talking about this issue about the open database, and how to find the independent musician to reach into a space like that. And they actually deliver to Spotify and iTunes and hundreds of thousands of songs every week, and they're like a kind of middle person to kind of get the data from the labels up into the services. So they hold lots of identities around me. So we're developing with them how we could potentially link in the Creative Passport into their service. Okay, we went to Hamburg, and here I actually have these gloves, which I think I performed last time I was here. They're called the Mimu gloves. Essentially, it's like trying to reach into the music, into the digital bits of the music making. So the the reverb, or trying to sample my voice, move it over there, play air drums, play air guitar, and it's a kind of a bit of a similarity in the way that I wanted to just get closer to the data. I wanted to get closer to the creativity, the spontaneity, get to the source of the creativity quicker. And so develop these wireless gestural gloves to be able to reach inside the laptop without having to stand behind a load of stuff. And I feel like the equivalent of that is what I spend a lot of my day doing, which is admin, chasing payments, trying to, just kind of make myself a bit more I don't know, together. I want to have a biography, for example, where I upload a biography into what we call the Creative Passport, and the idea would be that that would connect to all of the other services to save them not having the right information. I mean, there's a company called All Music we discovered in Hamburg, thanks to somebody called, well, who has this company called iMusician, where they have data problems, and they were about kind of musicians' information, and they were saying that All Music apparently gets paid $500,000 every year by iTunes to deliver biographies about the people on iTunes, but they're really out of date. Like my one's not. I don't think it's been updated since 2005, but I could do that. But I don't have a way to do that. Again, so another reason to have this idea of so the musician can link into the services. Even All Music could pay me for my data. I'd save them some time and money. They'd give better data to iTunes, or in time maybe iTunes might come direct to the Creative Passport. Here we also showed an exhibition where we showed virtual reality piece that I've been doing with some guys in Austin, a 3-song kind of exploration where you go in and you hear these 3 songs actually embodied around my house. So the idea is that people are in my house while I'm on tour, and they listen to these 3 songs. And what really changed my life actually about this was this idea of how after the show that the fans could come into like a lobby area and I could have a chat with them. And this was just before the tour. We did the first one, and it was amazing to be able to not have been on tour for about 8 years, and that my first interaction with the fans was actually in VR. They were like in Norway, in New Zealand, in South Africa, in wherever, all over the world. And I was just chatting to them like might chat to you today. And it really just made me feel, wow, this huge, incredible potential in the social side of what VR could do for us. And it really got me excited about my next project, which I won't talk about today. But the problem with VR is that it's impossible to get licenses for virtual reality to be able to develop with that and to know how to license music for those games, for those experiences. And that's actually the same with pretty much anything. It's really hard to get licenses, to get permissions to use works. There's, again, nowhere to find this data. It takes a very long time. I mean, I've been lucky in life to have occasionally got into a TV or a TV show or a game or a game recently actually, but or a film. But the reason I got there was because I have champions throughout my old life when I had physical sales, and it was much easier to navigate the music industry when we hadn't gone digital yet. And that's where those kind of I was on their roster and they could go independently and go to speak to film directors and music supervisors and get me into these things. But we don't have a digital way to do that. We don't have a data way to explore who has the licenses for what films, maybe even where they are in the world, maybe even who in Malmo at this particular point. Maybe there's somebody in Hollywood doing a piece, or maybe there's somebody in Denmark, in Sweden, sorry, doing a piece around a new film, and they want to find a particular composer in Malmo to do a particular thing, and they want them to be like female, and they want them to be techie, and they want them to be interested in, I don't know, solar or something. And they might discover that from their Creative Passport they'll find exactly who they need, because you're sharing your own unique data and your skill sets and your interests and passions, and maybe even potentially your calendar with certain services that could develop onto that layer. And here we also shared a project that we're doing called The Life of a Song. It explains how one song over 15 years and the shape of the music industry has changed from physical into digital and into streaming, and how that has changed the income flow, and how it's changed the data feedback, and how it's increased opacity in the music industry by more people in between the payment and the pay. So if you're interested in what's wrong with the music industry through the lens of a song, then you can go to Life of a Song. Just look up Life of a Song, Mycelia, and you'll find it. And it's quite interesting. It's not comprehensive. We can't get a lot of the data from the labels and from certain people, but we've also shared that there too, because there are people like Intellectual Property Office or WIPO even who are interested in exactly what is it that is not transparent. And it is sometimes hard to exactly explain that. So we've tried to do that in the flow of one song. So when we're in Oslo, what time is it? Oh my God. We've got like 10 cities to go. I'll be very quick. Okay, Oslo. Ariana Grande. Why have I put that there? Oh, right, because Ariana Grande released a new album called Sweetener. So she's been a fan of mine for years. I saw her stuff when she was 17 on YouTube. She was covering my songs. And we've just been in contact over the years. She's used my gloves in stadiums, and it's been pretty exciting. Anyway, so she put out this song. It's called Good Night and Go. And it's a cover of one of my songs called Good Night and Go. And 90% of it is originally mine, and 10% of it is her song. Yet in the credits, when you go to Spotify, which now has writer credits for the last 3 months or something, it's had writer credits, it doesn't have any mention, or it didn't have any mention of my name. So all my fans were up in arms. They were like, how can she not mention that Imogen is clearly an Imogen Heap song? They were really angry with her. And I was like, oh my God, I'm sure she's so embarrassed. She's just like probably just rolling around, just so embarrassed. And the truth is that, of course, she's not responsible for that. She's busy. She's busy doing massive tours of the world and crazy things. So what had to happen was I had to call up, I had to call up my ex-manager, who had to call up Scooter Braun, who's her manager, who had to call up the label, Republic, who then had to call up the distributor, probably someone like Fugger, who would let all the distributors know, who would let then the publishers know, who would then probably have to let the art team know next time it was published in a physical label copy. So there's an incredibly long problem just from one tiny credit that involves probably about 10 or 15 people to change that, and maybe cost the industry, I don't know, £1,500 just to change that tiny thing. I could do that with my Creative Passport in a nanosecond if we could just find a way to integrate into those systems. So again, another reason why we're just trying to create this identity for us. While we were there, we were also discovering that in Norway, a lot of the music makers in our Changemaker forum were kind of upset at the fact that the USA writers get paid, the USA performers get paid from performance income on Norwegian radio, but Norwegian performers don't get paid for performance on American radio, and they were annoyed that they're getting more money than they are, basically. Fair enough. This is a problem all around the world, is that there's no standard. So you've got composition rights, you've got mechanical rights, which is the reproduction of a song. You've got publishers, you've got record labels, you've got DSPs, you've got all these different entities, and they all have different pricings, and they all have different percentages, and there's no standards, and it's really, really hard to navigate, which is another reason why we've done the life of a song, to try to explain some of those percentages where we can. So what we're doing in each city that we're going is we're kind of bringing together music makers to try to get to see where the problems lie and how we can help. Because when I was in Prague, I met an enabler. This is somebody who paid £150 to come and have a bit more of a kind of bit more of me, I suppose, on the tour, and to really help fund the early beginnings of this tour, because it's quite expensive to tour. I think there's 8 people for a whole week, every city, to do all of these things. And discovered that he was a musician, and he had about 20 years ago, there was a website called mp3.com where musicians could sell their songs and earn money the minute it sold. Okay, that seems like, well, of course that should happen. But that doesn't happen, because it can take up to 2 years to receive a payment from a streaming service. But yet 20 years ago, it was done in a second. And he actually made a living out of that. But the problem was that the labels kind of got interested in that, and then they kind of made that illegal. I think the guy who set up mp3.com went to jail, and all kinds of weird stuff happened. So basically the labels failed to adopt some really incredible technology. They put loads of people in jail who basically just loved music, and had this, we had this real opportunity to change the music industry for the better at the time of MP3, but it didn't happen. So I think that we shouldn't miss that opportunity with blockchain technology, as we can really change big things again. When I was in Reykjavik, I was at a radio station called Bylgjan, and I was there. He was interested, I think, because he'd heard that Ariana Grande covered a song of mine, and he was also interested in the mycelia stuff, because our promo person got in touch with him. Anyway, he was a bit embarrassed because he didn't have any of my songs. And he basically had to go onto YouTube to find a song to play on his radio station. And he was really embarrassed. I said, "Oh, don't worry, you're not expected to host the entire planet's, discography in your own little server in Iceland." And he kind of laughed. But that is the reality, is that it's really hard for even a radio station whose number one job is to share music with the world, can't get the data that they need because it's too much for them to host that internally. There should be a way for a radio to be able to play a song, and that song pays everyone instantly. Because the reality is, what happens, he plays that song, he has to go into his big sheet and at the end of the year write all of the songs, send to Steph, who's the collection society for composition in Iceland, send all the data, send it to Steph, all of the hundreds of thousands of songs that they played over the whole year. I guess they kind of manually do that, and then they send that to Steph, and then Steph, along with all of the other radio stations in the whole of Iceland, then collect that data, and then they send it to 240 collection societies, and then all of those collection societies individually go, "Oh, that's my one, oh, that's my one, oh, that's my one, that's my one, that's my one," and then they send that back to Steph, and then Steph goes, "Okay, yep," sends the money over to the PRS in my case, in England. And the payment that would probably end up in my bank account would probably be like 1p. But it takes 2 years to do that, and probably costs the system at least 100 or 1,000 times as much just to deliver that payment. It is just crazy town. I also met Björk, which was fun, and I met a company called Genki Instruments, who we're now developing with the Mimu gloves, another controller for our software called Glover. The reason I talk about that is because it's also really, every time I mention a company that I like to work with, a company's gear, this is a kind of instrument that you could add and augment into data of a song. Another point of information for somebody to find you, to find that song. It's really, really impossible when you think, actually, maybe it's the next slide. Oh, I'll get to that bit in a minute. Like, how do you oh, there you go. Amsterdam. My friend Andy Kahn, he has this service called Streamliner. It's like 3D visualizing artwork for music. So you can see all the liner notes, and you can see all the pictures, and it's interactive, and you can data search. So the idea is that Streamliner is soon going to go live, crowdsourcing, kind of scanning in artwork, and the data from the text will be scraped and potentially pushed to the Creative Passport and to an open songs database, perhaps for incentive, for token incentive, if it's blockchain tokens of some sort. We could try to figure all this out on this world tour. But he mentioned that there's around 170 years worth of constant listening on Spotify. To listen to every single thing on Spotify would take you 170 years, and that's with no sleep or anything. That's a lot of time, and that actually makes me panic, because I'm like, how am I ever going to find the songs that I want to hear? How am I going to find the songs that I am going to fall in love to? Or, I mean, I'm already in love. Sorry, Michael, he's somewhere in here. But how am I going to find those songs to, like, that maybe Scout, my daughter, is going to fall in love to, or want to help her get out of bed in the morning and go to school if she's not having such a good time? How are we going to help our songs find people? And I think if we can, again, find ways for musicians to augment tagging into songs, so that emotional data, tempo data, we can find other ways for that song to reach us, or maybe bits of gear like Genki Instruments, a ring to gesturally make that music, maybe, or perhaps the real inspiration. Or anyway, okay, talked about Fuga, Native Instruments. Another example of a piece of gear that I use, and Vibrate is a company who's mapping the music industry, live music industry, another service on the blockchain that we're interfacing with, trying to interface with. Because essentially, there's like hundreds and hundreds of new services that are being developed on blockchain, which is great, loads of great ideas there, but it's really terrifying for a music maker to have all of this new stuff out there, and again, like even more fragmentation, even more kind of dispersion of the self. So this idea of try to bring it all home, try to create so that we're more than the sum of our parts, and can help the flow of data. In Brussels, we shared our Creative Passport there with some MEPs, and we talked about this idea of instrument passports and carnets, because with Brexit, so bad. Everything's just gone out of my mind now. Yeah, so every single time, for example, like obviously millions of bad, awful things about Brexit, most of them are awful. So when you cross a border in the future, will it be that I have to take out all of my equipment, take out all of my serial codes, and this is what I have to do if I go to the States, for example, I have to have this thing, a document, a carnet, it takes forever, just to check that you haven't sold something in a country. Complete nightmare if I have to do that in every single border. I'm sure I hopefully won't have to do that. But we talked about that, about the idea of having passports that could have carnets, instruments that could have passports so that we could help the carnet. And we did a Changemaker forum with the British Council, who's just helping host us around the world in their various offices to do these Changemaker forums. Okay, so then we went to Istanbul. Yeah, it was a different kinds of problem there, different type of music industry, not the one that I'm kind of used to. Very bad, not such good support from the government for musicians there. Not so many options, not so easy to get visas to get out of the country and go and work as a musician. Really, really hard to get into the kind of global or kind of competitive commercial music industry, and that's Turkey. But imagine somewhere like Somalia or like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of somewhere. There's loads of places that don't have any way for a musician to earn money from the radio or from streaming, or they're not even on the map. No way to get in there at all. And that's because they don't have any way of identifying themselves. I mean, they don't have credit cards, but everybody's got a phone. So again, another way that the Creative Passport could really make the music industry truly global and put everybody at the kind of same playing field by giving everyone the same data chance to kind of be a beacon for their data and reach out just as much as Madonna or myself or whoever. That everybody's data is speaking for themselves to bring opportunities to them. So we went to Malta. It's a blockchain island, they like to call themselves. And there is a really interesting initiative there called Music Now, who are outside of the music industry. Their last thing they did was called, it was around getting 50 million fund for malaria, to try to get some development for malaria. And he's working with the Microsoft Gates Foundation, the Bill Gates Foundation. So he's done malaria. He's got a load of money for that, and now he's on to music because he thinks that is just as important as malaria. Yes. So what's great about this is that in the music industry, they are not so interested in sorting out the problems. Some of them are not so interested, and perhaps that is because the inefficiency in the music industry is, for some people, their actual bread and butter. And they do sometimes reveal themselves to be large companies and are not exactly supporting what we're doing. They're not supporting it, but that's just as bad. So it's really amazing to have an organisation from outside the music industry seeing the problems, trying to get what's called an ERIC. I can't remember what that stands for, like a European Research Independent Consortium or something. But basically it means if a project reaches ERIC status, 3 member states have to agree that in Europe that something is really awry, and if they can get 3 member states to agree to that, then apparently an ERIC status is never denied. And they've got 2, and they're nearly on to 3. And if they get it, it means money can flow into this open database of works from the Maltese lot, from this Music Now, and we can start developing the Creative Passport further as somebody who would be wanting to realise such a thing. So very excited about that. We should hear in a couple of weeks. Fingers crossed. It's been a long time waiting, and it's great. It's just great to go to a country where you don't have to explain the potentials of blockchain. I remember 4 years ago in the UK trying to speak to UK Music. It's like the board of all the kind of big bodies of the music industry as a music maker coming in going, hey, blockchain, we should get on this. And they're like, what's that? I'm like, okay, so trying to explain what blockchain is, and they were like, okay, yeah, yeah, come back to us about that. And then meanwhile, get on with all the other stuff, the same old problems. And I'm like, yes, but all of these problems that you're having could be helped if we started to develop for the blockchain technology. And they weren't having any of it at the time. But then 2 years later, now they'd listen a little bit. But it just takes, it's nice to go to a country where they fully embrace it, or a state where they fully embrace it. It's a very different feeling of energy and funding. So, yeah. Lisbon Web Summit. I met Tim Berners-Lee. Yes! I've always wanted to meet him. We've so nearly won some money, some European money, with an initiative that we were all kind of for Horizon 2020 project. It was called Everywhere, and it was all around personal data, and it kind of really linked into what we were doing with the Creative Passport, and we came second, even with Tim Berners-Lee. So yeah, I don't know who won actually. Anyway, it's quite disappointing, but finally met him, and I'm excited about Solid. I'm excited about this idea, you know, kind of fulfilling or getting closer to his imagination of the semantic web, about the ownership of data, and kind of cleaning up the web, and kind of, what did he call it? A contract for the web he's been talking about. Kind of, yeah, how do we want to behave on the web to create something which we can really trust and value even more. And so, yeah, we're looking into how Solid, the technology, can be brought into the Creative Passport or vice versa. And then Milan was just last week. Did a Skype with George Howard, actually, from Forbes. He was the first person that I did a piece with in, if it was 4 years ago, when I talked about this grand idea. And that's actually at the same time, exactly the same time. It's a bit funny. So a musician going, oh yeah, blockchain, something here. Got lots of interest from musicians, and some services. And Rethink Music was a paper that they published literally like the same day, and we didn't know about each other's thing, and they were talking about the future of blockchain and why and the need for it, and they'd done a massive load of bit of research which explained that $45 billion a year in royalty distribution, that's what's given out from, I guess, the services all around, but only half of that reaches the music maker, the right people. Half of it goes to the wrong people. And so there's not really the incentive. Again, that's a lot of money going into the wrong pockets. That's basically 25 billion or 22.5 billion. No, it's not. It is 22.5 billion a year incentive to not want to, move forward and change things for the better. So anyway, we did a nice piece there, a little Skype on it when I was in Milan to check in with them and to share what we're doing with people like IBM and try to hopefully get sponsorship for the next bit of the tour. While I was there, I also met a man called Polytechnic, I can't remember his name, Augusto, I think. He's a professor in AI, and we're talking about how the song, again, could be discovered via kind of emotionally mapping songs, which they've already done a lot of work on, time signatures, tempos. So there might not even be a way for, I'm sure there isn't even a need soon for the musician to actually type in that data. It will already be kind of going through a filter of some sort when it goes into the Open Songs database, so that those songs can find somebody when they're sad, when they need to be pepped up, when they need to, get a bit of courage. Perhaps these songs, by way of their emotional kind of give, can find people when they need them, depending on what their computers or your phone sensors might say about your emotional point of being at that time. So you might discover music by the help of your AI personal assistant on your phone or something. But again, how can we help kind of move that direction of travel so that we don't ever have to worry about advertising? Because incentive economy, this idea that when we're ready for something, we can reach out, whether that's your emotional response to something, or whether that's when you say you're ready to receive something, like I want some offers of some cruises in wherever, or I want an offer of microphones in this price range, that's when you get advertising pushed to you, but not before then. And again, like this incentive economy, how can we help songs be that, so that we're not just shouting and spending like £1 million to get a number up in the top. You have to spend $1 million marketing to get in the top 10 in America. Not that it's all about the top 10, but it just gives you an idea of how crazy amounts of money and time go to just telling people about songs because they're trying to reach above the noise. Okay. So, Copenhagen, Malmö. I really haven't got time to go on anymore, actually. I just wanted to mention some inspirational people. Bjarke Ingels. Anyone heard of him? He's a great architect, and he's taught me this idea that when I saw this talk he did once. So he's from Copenhagen, and he showed this image of him designing the beginnings of a building, and he basically they cleared the site, so they basically had a brown site. They just had an open field in the middle of this kind of very urban space. And what they did was they just let the people kind of go where they wanted, and they created the pathways of where they needed to go. And that was how they then built the building around the people and where they wanted to go. And so what we're trying to do on this tour is essentially create the pathways, help the music makers and the services help us develop those pathways so that we can create the open, the grass or the open layer of data, which is just thousands of data points for each individual music maker, but how can we link into already existing data? How can we add and augment to data that isn't there? And how can we create those lines, the services, the protocol to reach the data from whoever needs it? Because if there's something that somebody wants to know and they can't find it, then somebody out there is missing out. Well, two people are missing out. The person who wants to know and the person who has the data. There's just, if I had a creative passport right now, I would share with you that Martin de Ture, who's I've done this all around Denmark, sorry. Martin de Ture, because that's where I mainly am this week. He's a great video director. Simon Steen Andersen, amazing Danish composer, written this beautiful piece called Black Box Music. And if on iTunes they were actually looking into my actual inspirations, they would discover people like Simon Steen Andersen and Car Park North, actually, for a time. Instead of putting Kate Bush and whoever else they put, Bjork. I mean, I like Bjork, and I like Kate Bush, but I didn't grow up like buying their records, listening to their music, inspired by them. Well, I was inspired by Bjork, actually, but Kate Bush, I don't really know her work, even though I'm sure she's lovely and she's very talented, I know, but she wasn't an inspiration. But these people I would like to be able to point to. I would like another way for people to be able to find them. And yeah, there's a MEP here called Margaret Vestager, who's also I'd like to talk to about an issue in the music industry. Okay, and so then the last one is actually Helsinki, which is the week after next. We don't know what's going to happen. We've got some people. We've got loads more than that, but that's all I could figure out this morning at 3:30 in the morning, just like scribbling stuff out. So yeah, we're looking forward to seeing what happens in Helsinki. And then when we get to London, back to London on the 9th of December, we're going to host some creative passport parties, essentially, where we're going to get every musician that I've worked with over the years in whatever guise, whether I've been doing a workshop with them, or I've done some jaw harp on their record, or I've done some writing for whatever it might be, Taylor Swift or who knows, to get them all in a room, and we're going to begin signing, verifying each other's creative passports. We're just going to download a very simple app, which we're going to use test flight for, because it's a non-profit. It's just coming out of my own pocket at the moment, and we're just getting development in kind. So we're going to have a test flight app which we're going to download, and we're going to invite my music maker collaborators to do the same, and then at my house the day that I get back on my 41st birthday, we're going to sign each other's, and we're going to start to create these links to each other, and with that hopefully we'll start to build kind of very organically, and as we continue to tour around the rest of the world next year, to show how many, hundreds, thousands, 10,000, 100,000, millions, 10 million, there's at least 100 million music makers in the world. How can we show ourselves? And so perhaps we'll start something very small on the 9th of December. We've already done a lot of research and a lot of talking about it, and hopefully the music makers will be excited and empowered enough to just want to show put their flag in the sand, show a little bit of profile information. But it's really just a little notification to the world to say, here I am, here's what I'm connected to, and I believe in a better future for music. So, yeah, that was an odd one. It's quite long. Sorry about that. Hopefully just got a little bit of an insight into what we're doing. And if you do have any musician friends, please, share with them that link. We're actually doing a workshop tomorrow? No, Friday. Music Maker Forum. Tomorrow, where's Carlotta? Saturday and Sunday. A design sprint on the Creative Passport with music makers and services. Okay, and coders, hopefully. So, thank you very much. Okay.